Hello, today I'm going to be having a look at a program called JPEGmini from a company called Beamer. What does it do? Well, it takes an original JPEG and compresses it down further. As you can see in this example, it's done it by 6.5 times. Results will vary depending on the quality of the original. This one has gone down by 3.3 times. How much it's already been compressed, the size of the original, and other factors such as the detail within the photograph itself. Comes in 3 flavors. There's a basic one, which is the one that I use. It's about £17 in the App Store. There's a Pro version, which works much faster. It has a Lightroom plugin, and it can handle much larger JPEG sizes. The smaller one has coped with everything that I've thrown at it, so that's why I use that one. The third option is a JPEGmini server version, and this is really designed for organizations that have lots of images on a website. They want to save on bandwidth costs, make their websites load faster, etc. So the Pro photographer might well be in this area here, the keen amateur in the standard version. There is a free version available that's on the App Store, and there's also on this website, JPEGmini.com, a version where you can upload your originals and see what it looks like for yourself without having to install an app. So let's see it in action. I'm going to close down Safari, and in Photoshop I have an image here. It's been color corrected and slightly sharpened. It's an image that came from a RAW file, and the original RAW file is 28 megabytes. And what I'm going to do is to save this as a JPEG, and in doing so I'm going to reduce down the size of the image. You can see it's about a third of its original dimension. I've in fact taken it down to a width on the longest edge of 2000 pixels. And I'm going to save this at a quality of 100. I wouldn't normally save an image at 100 quality, but I want to give JPEGmini the best opportunity to compress it as much as it can. I have a resultant file size of 2 megabytes. Let's make that. We'll call it man JPEG, and we'll hide Photoshop and have a look at that file on my disk. And there you can see it's come down to 2 megabytes. What happens then when we process that file through JPEGmini? We open up to this very straightforward interface. There are a couple of preferences that you can set. I can, for example, optimize the originals, which basically means I'm going to overwrite the original JPEG and just leave myself one file. I don't really want to do that. I want to create a new version of the file. In this instance, I'm going to save it back to the same export folder that the original is in, and it will amend the file name, calling it -1, etc. I can resize photographs if I want to. I've already taken our image down to 2000 pixels on the longest edge, so I don't need to do that in this instance. However, if it's part of your workflow and you, for example, have a website where you have a standard size, you could build that into JPEGmini as a part of your workflow. How does it work? Well, it's easy. We just drag our image onto that area here, and it will make a new file, as it's done here, appended with -1, as I suggested earlier. It's taken off 1.63 megabytes of file size, which equates to 5.4 times as small as the original. It's in fact come down to 373 kilobytes. So how does that compare with the 100% scale version, or quality version I should say, that we made originally? Well, what I'm going to do is to open that file in Photoshop. So we're now looking at the JPEG that Photoshop created at 100 quality. And on top of that, I'm going to place the new file that JPEGmini made, and we're going to see if we can see any difference. By bringing them into Photoshop like this, what it allows me to do is to turn layers off and on, and as I do so, I really can't see any difference between those two. The top layer is JPEGmini, the one that's underneath is the 100% quality version that's 2 megabytes in size, so 373 kilobytes versus 2 megabytes. I can't see any difference. It's done a great job. What if we zoom in? Going the wrong way. I'm now at 800%, and what we're looking at here is the JPEGmini version, and well, I can see the typical square artifacts start to appear, and I can also see some square artifacts around this border area where there's a distinction between light and dark, which is where you often see a lot of artifacts. If I flick back to the original, well, we can see those squares have gone away. There's sensor grain, but we obviously couldn't avoid seeing that at this kind of scale. But if I flick back to the JPEGmini version, yes, there are artifacts there. It's just that we can't see them when we look at 100% scale. So in fact, what JPEGmini has done is it's done a great job of compressing the image as a standard JPEG. There's no magic sauce here. It's not creating any kind of special file format. It just sticks to the bog standard JPEG format and the methods contained within it. But it's guessed, in looking at the picture, how much can it compress it and still retain visual integrity while looking at it at 100%. What we could do is an experiment to see how the JPEGmini version of the file compares if we compress using Photoshop down to about the same file size. So if I go back to the original Photoshop file, doesn't look any difference on screen, which is a testament to JPEGmini, but I'm now looking at the original, and we compress that down, we will remember that the file size was 373. So if I adjust this quality slider to give me a file size that's as close to 373 as I can get it, it's probably going to be about 50%, I think. Let's see what that comes down to. Well, it's come down to 353, so slightly smaller than the JPEGmini version. I'll create that, and I'm going to call it Man 50 because we went down 50% quality. We'll hide Photoshop, and there's our new file compared to the one that JPEGmini made. So let's do another test and open those two files again in Photoshop. So I'm going back. We will recall that the background layer is the 100% quality. The layer that says Man 1 is the JPEGmini version, and I'm now going to place on top of that the new version that's the slightly smaller file size version than the JPEGmini one. So we are now looking at the Photoshop version of the file that's at 353 kilobytes, and if I turn off and on that layer, again I really can't see any difference. Photoshop has also done a great job of compressing the file down by the same amount. Let's have a look at increased magnification. I'm going to go up to 1200. There we go. And we'll look at the same area of arm that we were looking at before. Now this is the Photoshop version, and if I turn off this layer it will flick to JPEGmini. Now I would say that both of those images are beginning to show JPEG compression artifacts, and if anything, I would say that there's a bit more detail. Let's come out a little bit in the Photoshop version, but they're on a par. There's very little between them, and certainly when we compare to the original, and I go back to the Photoshop version and now the JPEGmini version, we can see that in both instances Photoshop and JPEGmini are beginning to show artifacts at the magnified scale. So what's JPEGmini actually giving us? Well, I think what it's doing is it's doing a great job of compressing the image by as much as possible before we can start to see artifacts when viewed at 100%. It's not doing anything very special. It's in the sense that it's just creating a pure JPEG. There's no jiggery pokery or magic sauce going on in the compression itself, just in the decision about how much to compress it. In fact, one way of describing what it's doing is it's getting rid of this quality slider and just making the assumption that we always want to compress a JPEG as much as possible. There is, I do have a couple of grumbles. There's a testimony here which says that it's really suggesting that there is no difference between the original and the JPEGmini version. This particular person is saying that they analyze the file pixel by pixel. Well, I think we've just seen that you can actually see a difference pixel by pixel, so I don't support that claim. There's also a perhaps more serious grumble, which is that on their websites, on their FAQ, they're suggesting that you could compress your whole hard disk, including your photo library, with JPEGmini. Well, I really would advise against that. I would only ever use JPEGmini to create copies of originals. It is a JPEG method. It's throwing away information, and although it does an excellent job, I can't imagine that you would want to process your whole photo library unless you had a copy of it backed up somewhere else. So I don't support that view. But anyway, JPEGmini comes in these 3 versions, and you can get it in the Mac App Store. There's a free version available for both Windows and Mac, and there is even on this website a place where you can upload your own photographs and it will download them back down so you can test it for yourself without even having to install the app. Has it become part of my workflow? Yes, it has. It's a great product. I just think it overclaims on its ability to not make any difference between the original and the new version. JPEGmini.